All right, welcome back. Truth and Transparency welcomes you back. Let those notifications click in. Who's the fool? Hippler, the state, or the defense? Going back to the orders that Hippler gave us after the January 23rd, 25th, 2025 suppression hearing, IGG, to get the Franks, all that stuff. Findings of facts, what's going to happen, what's in, what's out. Everything was denied. But there was heavy orders in terms of an order denying it. And then here we have a ton of information. Now, again, I'm letting all those lovely notifications click off because this is very, very important. Again, just a reminder, we now know things that we didn't know before, but that's us knowing it, not the police, not the prosecutors, not the defense, we as the public. We know it now, such as the text messages and the 911 call. Big thing is the text messages. Okay, so right here, the state is saying, hey, we're not going to use IGG, but we want to use it. We want to have this tip. We will, without mentioning the source or substance of the tip, and that law enforcement then followed up and identified the defendant. So if you go back to, real quick, the IGG order on defendant's motion to suppress the genetic information. The whole purpose was this was because defendant asserts that law enforcement violated his constitutional rights by failing to secure a warrant before conducting the IGG and trash pull, period. He seeks to suppress all evidence obtained through those searches. Now, findings of fact, according to Judge Hippler. You read all about this, but we get to this part, which is identifying Mr. Koberger. Subsequently, law enforcement made the decision to pursue forensic investigative genetic genealogy testing on Q1.1. That is the sheath. Such testing begins, and then you can read all that. Next, the IGG was first performed after it was at the Idaho State Lab where it did the STR. Then Idaho State Lab sent it to Othram. The IGG was first performed by Othram, a company, great. Othram was asked to develop an SMP. That's the first time the SMP kicks in for and from Q1.1 upload to these genealogy sites. Awesome. The Idaho State Police delivered Q1.1 to Othram on November 22nd. Othram developed the SNP profile from Q1.1 and searched family trees, or family tree, DNA, all the things that they searched. Nothing, they didn't breach any that we know of. They didn't breach anything. Then there was a decision to be made because it came back to 4 brothers. Then there was lack of cooperation from those brothers, but there was a big old powwow meeting on December 10th, 2022. Members of law enforcement, including the FBI, had a meeting to discuss Othram's work. As a result, a decision was made that the FBI was going to take over the IGG. That same day, Othram was instructed to stop work and turn over its SMP profile and search results to the Idaho State Police. Then the Idaho State Police were going to get it then to the FBI. Othram did so, along with a preliminary report, right? The Idaho State Police then turned their mission to the FBI, which was able to use Othram's profile to develop a significantly larger SNP profile, right? We know the FBI violated their own policy by and through. However, the policy says, don't do this, X, Y, Z. But however, Hippler wants to point out that, hey, it's just restrictions. It's just, hey, this is probably how you should do it. He cites that on down here. From the information acquired through the databases, the FBI was able to build a family tree and arrive at a potential match. On December 19th, 2022, the FBI provided defendant's name. Now, you're going to sit here and tell me that you think that we're going to get to this point. The FBI is your tip. These are the facts. You cannot go and change the facts of the case. So come on in, saddle up. I got something special for you. I need to grab my water. I need to crack a little water for this. The FBI gave the tip. Okay, so these are the facts. Now, the state comes through and says, hey, we don't want to talk about anything about the IGG, but we need to have this tip that we just going to generate to say, hey, there's no substance, there's no source. We just got it, and that's what got us to Brian Kober, that, we followed through and it led to the defendant. That in and of itself is nuts. The confrontation clause alone, I mean, it's one thing to suppress information. It's another thing to completely change a narrative on how you got to somebody. So here we go. I want you guys now to remember this. So this is Hippler's own words on December 19th. So the tip, by going this way with the state, you'd be saying that, well, you can't say that you got his name before this date, right? So your tip came in on the 19th, right? And then, so just think about that now. And that should be the end of it. Okay, law enforcement was driven. Okay. As the investigation ensued, okay, this is still his findings of facts. As the investigation ensued, law enforcement discovered that the defendant had driven from Pullman, Washington to his parents' home in a gated community in Monroe County. But for the purposes of just the facts of, okay. The FBI instructed that the identification of defendant as a person of interest was to be considered solely as a tip. The only way that you're going to be able to, and I don't even think you even have a chance, but either you would not be able to exclude the FBI as being your tip, because that's the fact. Okay? The fact is that the FBI is your tip. They provided that source. Period. There is no changing that. You cannot rewrite history. Okay? No changing it. Ready? So, then I went to page 12. Again, this is an order that came out. This is Hippler's own words. Likewise, here, at some point, defendant apparently interacted with the sheath to a sufficient enough degree that he left his DNA there. on that sheath. Whether he knew he left his DNA behind is of no consequence. It is only relevant that he exposed his DNA to the public by leaving it on the sheath, thus forfeiting any reasonable expectation of privacy in the DNA left behind. Okay? So keep that in mind. And now, okay. Here, defendant provided no evidence that the SNP profile developed from Q1.1 through IGG revealed any genetic predisposition or psychological or medical condition. As Mr. Helwig testified, the SNP that carried substance information, blah, 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 blah. Rather, IGG only implicates those SNPs associated with ancestry and genealogy in order to determine genetic associations, build a family tree, and identify potential genetic relatives of the uploaded SNP profile. It is simply an identification tool. That's exactly what it is. It is an identification tool. That's exactly what it is. This is how you identified Brian Koberger. There is no rewriting history on this. If IGG goes, it all goes. You cannot rewrite history, ladies and gentlemen. You just cannot do it. In this regard, and then they're going to be talking about Carpenter, this is not the type of information the DNA provided in this case. Law enforcement here extracted and analyzed the DNA of an unknown suspect solely for identification purposes. Moreover, even assuming there were sensitive genetic details revealed by the IGG performed here, the fact that the DNA was obtained from a crime scene and analyzed for the purposes of identifying the perpetrator displaces any reasonable expectation of privacy. Hey, Judge Hippler, the state is willing to agree and now gives notice to the court, yourself, and counsel that it will only seek to introduce evidence/testimony that law enforcement received a tip without mention of the source or substance of the tip, and that law enforcement then followed up and identified the defendant. That ain't never happening. Now, go to Judge Hippler, and this is the good stuff. You go to the Franks. When you go to the Franks, you would turn to page 2. The court concluded that the search warrants are not invalid based on the omissions of defendant's identification through IGG because that information would have only bolstered probable cause for the searches. As to the remaining challenges, the court finds defendant has failed to carry his preliminary burden under Franks and therefore denies his motion for a Franks hearing. Now, with what we know now, we know it now as it being new to us, but they knew it back then. All right, so again, the court concluded that the search warrants are not invalid. We all know this all got denied. So the search warrants are not invalid based on the omissions of defendant's identification through IGG. On the omission. That means they were all valid with what you guys gave. It developed probable cause, and you got it. The only thing that IGG would have done is bolster your probable cause. These are Judge Hippler's words, okay? This is how this is about to be circumvented. So Hippler says, nope, the omission of defendant's identification through IGG, basically saying, as we all know, the defense is saying, this is all bullshit. This is all lies. This is not how they got to Brian Koberger. We go and we have this suppression hearings on all these different, motions to suppress based off of, all these different search warrants, as we all know, and it all came back as denied. But here are the words. Next, Hippler said, the defendant has not met his Franks burden on issues 1 and 2 and challenges Exhibit A. Defendant has not demonstrated in his proffers any misrepresentations or omissions, much less that they were made intentionally or recklessly, as they refer to Exhibit A, which is everybody's affidavits. The Idaho Court of Appeals rejected the defendant's argument, this is in a different case, findings that a common sense reading of the affidavit could allow the magistrate to reasonably infer that the information came from the officer's own observations or those other officers engaged in the investigation, because they had a big problem with this working document. People that are saying that they're doing something really truly aren't, and it's a big clusterfuck. And Hippler's like, get fucked. It's never happening. All right. So Hippler says that based off of hearing everybody out, these agents were assigned different investigative tasks per information that they learned in performing those tasks was then exchanged and transmitted into a working probable cause affidavit, i.e. the draft Exhibit A. The information from draft Exhibit A was then incorporated by law enforcement in varying degrees into the Exhibits A supporting the research or the search warrants. Okay. Further, under no circumstances could it be reasonably concluded that had the swearing officer disclosed which members of law enforcement provided which pieces of evidence, the magistrate would not have found probable cause. Blaker, I am being assisted by other officers, and this is what Hippler's saying. They made it all known, okay, that everybody's helping out each other. And this is where you get to the good stuff. Defendant has not established that alleged misrepresentations in any of the 3 challenged search warrants affidavits compels a Franks hearing. The reason this is so important is because what is the problem here? You guys didn't use IGG to get probable cause. You have all of this other stuff against Brian Koberger, and everybody thought that this probable cause affidavit is like the bee's knees. So what's the problem here if IGG is out and you can't use IGG? Because the state didn't want it anyways. They were never going to use it. Well, we're going to show you how that's not true. Defendant claims that Sergeant Blaker attributes discovering. Now, what does all of this have a problem with? The sheath. Okay. IGG comes from the sheath. The sheath's at the crime scene on the bed of one of the victims. So defendant claims that Sergeant Blaker attributes discovering the knife sheath to Idaho State police officers rather than Detective Payne. However, as the state correctly notes, defendant's challenge is nothing more than It's a quibble. It's a quibble over semantics. Is it? Well, we'll see if this is a quibble over semantics. In fact, it was Detective Payne who was the first investigator to discover the knife sheath. Grand jury transcript said, once discovered, Detective Payne notified ISP investigators who then collected and booked the sheath into evidence. At best, Sergeant Blaker's use of the word locate is ambiguous to whether it meant discovering or collecting. Under no reasonable reading could it be characterized as a misrepresentation, let alone an intentional or reckless one. Now, the defense was saying, okay, well, let's move on to this. Defendant claims that both detectives, Mowry and Payne, simultaneously, as well as Blaker, claim to have done cell site location information. As they say, I work as well as to work to determine whether the defendant's cell phone was in the area of the King Road residence. We all remember this. We've all gone through this. Now, defendant notes, however, that both detectives admitted at a subsequent hearing, Mowry and Payne, they testified in this matter, and that it was actually the FBI cast agent Nicholas Balance that did it. Nicholas Balance who performed the location work that the detectives then used to complete their respective affidavits. Now, mind you, what did Cy testify to? What did Tom Slinsky testify to? There would have been no time. When did you do this? There is no time between warrant 1 and warrant 2 that you would have done any of this. That means that you did it beforehand. How could you have done it beforehand? What were you in possession of? What was the FBI in possession of beforehand? They only got Brian Koberger's cell phone records and all that stuff when? December 23rd. Both of them back. The defense also said that Agent Balance was the individual who actually did the location work. Does not render that the detective statements intentionally or recklessly were false or even misleading. Do you see how now we're going down that path? Okay. Okay. How'd you get to Brian Koberger? Well, oh, and by the way, these Exhibit A's both state, after consulting with FBI CAS, exactly, I was able to determine estimated locations. I mean, Hippler, woo. Defendant asserts that the detectives both, quote unquote, claim to have done the work. They do not. They state they were able to determine the locations after consulting with FBI CAS. So this is Hippler spinning it. Both detectives explained in their respective affidavits that CAS was the FBI's cellular NAS survey team. Thus, it was made abundantly apparent to the magistrate that the detectives were relying on work performed by more specialized law enforcement agents in determining the cell phone locations. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the time. We're talking about when did this happen? When did this happen? Because there wasn't enough time between getting the one search warrant and the other search warrant, right? So now think about this stuff on the stand. When the state is going to have to call up their people on the stand. In sum, as to the statement encompassed in issue 2, defendant has not established that a misrepresentation was made. More, even if the challenged statement could possibly be construed as false, there is not a shred of evidence they were intentionally or recklessly false. I said, now it will be proven though. Maybe then, if you want to say that there, Hippler, it's about to come out now. The house of cards is coming down. Finally, even if the statements were intentionally or recklessly included, defendant has not established that they were necessary to establish probable cause. Okay. In a common and massive investigation such as this, which specific member of law enforcement actually discovered the knife sheath or performed the location work using CSL is irrelevant to probable cause. Exactly, Hippler. But what is it relevant to? Beyond a reasonable doubt. Because it goes into, that's your stupid ass probable cause. Great, awesome. But you said it so well there, Hippler. But after that point, it's hella relevant. It's motherfucking so relevant. What is important, Hippler says, is that the information came from other law enforcement personnel, which is a reliable basis for the warrant. Again, this is all about the warrant. Defendant has not met his Franks burden at issue 3. 10 eyewitness statement. Here you guys, here's this one's for Annie. In issues 3 and 10, defendant challenges the probable cause statements insofar as they set forth witnesses DM's interview descriptions of things she heard and saw on the night of November 13th, 2022. Defendant claims that law enforcement failed to inform the magistrate that DM's accounts describing the suspect were variable, that they were that she questioned her own memory, and that she did not recognize defendant when provided with a photo of him after his arrest. Defendant also contends, now remember I said this, I was like, there is no way that these were only what Anne's arguments were, as they would have been outlined in a very, very, like, I want to see, unleash them. I want to unseal the Franks, unseal the IG, unseal this shit. I'm not talking about that stupid hearing. I want to see the motion. Defendant also contends that law enforcement misrepresented statements made by DM. By the way, up here in your footer, defendant makes a cursory allegation within issue 2 regarding an email. Now, this is going to become very, very important now. The defense alleged that Agent Balance sent to Detective Payne identifying the dates and times of prior occasions that defendant's cell phone was using cellular resources consistent with it being in the area of 1122 King Road. The reason that this is important is because, and the reason that Hippler is just going right over it, is because this is outside. They didn't have Brian, like, what are the dates on those emails? Was it before December 19th? Is it before? The defense contended that the dates in that email were different than those in Agent Balance's cast reports. This is going to get wild, you guys. Wild. However, and then the reason that Hippler was able to just, nothing to see here. However, defendant has not identified a search warrant affidavit that included these alleged inconsistency dates. No, because this didn't have an affidavit with it. There was nothing they didn't put one with it. Thus, to the extent that the defense is claiming that the dates in the emails were false, Franks is not implicated because I can't prove that because you didn't give me the affidavit. Excuse me? The report and the emails show it. Anyways, DM was a roommate of the deceased and was in her own bedroom at the time of the homicides. Defendant's own proffer establishes that DM's accounts were remarkably consistent. Now, can you believe that Ann Taylor would have been saying those things? Hippler points out that the only thing that you can consider up and until would be 3 interviews with DM, by the way, because the Exhibit A for these affidavits, none of them were written after DM's 3rd interview that was in like question. Well, we all know that DM will not be saying that that person was walking towards her. That won't be coming out of her mouth. I mean, if it does, it's going to come out of her mouth that she said the opposite because she didn't know if he left out the slider because she didn't know what the fuck was going on. DM sat for at least 3 interviews with law enforcement, 2 on November 13th and one with one of those was Officer Noonan's, one of them was Maori, and then the November 17th. Her description of the intruder was notably similar during all 3 interviews. Now, knowing what we know now, just think. His forehead and mouth were covered. While she did not tell Officer Noonan's that she noticed the intruder carrying a vacuum-type object in his hand, she did convey that information to Detective Maori. Awesome. We all know what they said here. Okay. Now this just is going to blow. Now, knowing what we know now, ready? This is really, really important. Defendant also asserts that Exhibit A watered down DM's statements about hearing Kaylee Gonsalves around the time of the homicides. According to defendant, DM was unequivocal in her 3 interviews when she reported that at approximately 4 a.m., she heard Ms. Gonsalves walk upstairs with her dog before running back down the stairs saying, quote unquote, someone's here. In draft Exhibit A, however, law enforcement represents that DM said she heard who she thought was Gonsalves say something to the effect of there's someone's here. Defendant argues the addition of the word thought is false, and further, defendant surmises it was intentionally false to cover up the fact that DM was wrong about what she heard. This is where DM gets caught, okay? I believe if you want to look at those text messages in any type of sinister way, this is where DM would have gotten caught, okay? Judge Hippler basically says that, I'll wait for it. Defense points out that Ms. Gonsalves was killed in the upstairs bedroom where she was found the next morning. Thus, it could not have been her who DM heard running down the stairs at 4 a.m. Defendant contends that DM's misrepresentation or misperception, had it not been covered up by law enforcement, would have cast doubt on her reliability and therefore probable cause. Because, hello, these text messages? I mean, these text messages matter at the fuck all? However, the statement challenged by the defense, ready? This is Hippler. However, the statement challenged by defendant can be read in 2 ways. One, that DM said, I think it was Ms. Gonsalves, which is how defendant apparently reads it, and which he claims is inconsistent with DM's interview statements. Or 2, that DM said she heard Ms. Gonsalves, but law enforcement had reason to think it could have been someone else. When the statement is viewed in context, the latter makes more sense. In the respective Exhibit A's, Detective Payne and Sergeant Blaker immediately followed up the challenge statement with the following. A review of records obtained from a forensic download of Xana's phone showed this could also have been, remember I always wondered about this and I said, wait, what? because she is supposedly on TikTok, right? That it could have also been her because, oh wait, the TikTok's on, right? Well, how about what another way to be able to eliminate Kaylee is if Kaylee stopped using her phone completely at 2:52, right? So now I have reason to believe that there is evidence on Kaylee's phone that does not show that. Because Kaylee's still a possibility, right? That you would have to go this way. Because also a forensic download of Kaylee's phone would have shown that if Kaylee's phone was, that she hadn't used it, like after 2:52, there was no movement on it, usually kids have their phones on them, and if she would have went downstairs, she would have been like texting or something like that. So here, but Xana's was, and TikTok was on. The application was running at 4:12. But there's more. Through this explanation, Payne and Blaker are effectively conveying to the magistrate why they believe DM's statement of who she heard was questionable. Now, think about, we have the text messages now, or some of them. Not all of them, we have some of them. Thus, the court cannot conclude there is anything false or misleading in this regard. Based on defendant's proffer, it is not a foregone fact that DM was mistaken when she said she heard Miss Gonsalves. DM reported it was approximately 4 a.m. when she heard Miss Gonsalves walk upstairs and then run back down the stairs saying, "Someone's here." Miss Xana received a DoorDash delivery at the residence at 4 a.m. It is entirely possible, says Hippler, Miss Gonsalves ran downstairs when she heard the delivery person and then went to bed, after which she was killed. So he is saying that Kaylee went downstairs, then upstairs with her dog, and then says, "Oh, there's someone here," comes downstairs, and then goes back upstairs, and then is killed. This would mean that you're going to tell me that a college kid, because per her parents, no text messaging, no calls, nothing, was after 2:52 a.m. So Kaylee was up from 2:52 a.m. until 4, a little bit after 4, without using her phone. Or did Dylan get caught? Did Dylan slip up? Did Dylan slip up to extend Kaylee's life to 4? If she says that she heard Kaylee, that puts Kaylee alive until 4 still, which pushes the time of the crime into that box versus being up at 2:52, 3 o'clock. You understand? Hippler says none of DM's qualifications during her interview reasonably placed her presumed reliability in dispute. Are you fucking kidding me? She was a direct witness and was able to consistently articulate the details she remembered throughout each interview. Do you understand that that would tell me that if she was asked about these text messages, that she is definitely going to be saying, "I don't remember any of that. I don't remember doing any of that." And then that's where this whole frozen shock phase thing is going to come from, because she doesn't remember any of that. There's these, hey, she's calling people, she's texting people. She's writing Bethany and saying no one's answering, but Bethany didn't answer either. So again, DM, she was a direct witness, especially as to the facts relied on in the search warrant affidavit. Exactly. Exactly, they relied on those. Despite the fact that she claimed her memory was fuzzy, or that she felt like it was a dream, or that she was still intoxicated, despite all that, doesn't matter. Further, even if her reliability were in question, there was other, now this is now where we get into what ties this all into. Here's Hippler. There is other things, ready? There's other evidence included in the Exhibit A's that corroborate her account. For example, the security camera from 1112 King Road picked up audio of a struggle at 4:17 a.m. He uses the word struggle. Hippler uses that word, which coincides with DM stated. She thought was crying coming from Xana's room and a male voice speaking. It was shortly after this she opened the door for a third time and saw the suspect walk by her toward the sliding glass door, which corresponds with the surveillance video showing the suspect vehicle leaving at 1122 King Road at 4:20 a.m. In addition, law enforcement corroborated DM's description of defendant, through its vehicle identification efforts, which led investigators to defendant's driver's license information. Hippler is basically laying it out that this is what you're going to use, Idaho. The Exhibit A's note the defendant's physical description was consistent with DM's account. Now, knowing what we know right now, ready for this? Defendant has shown no objective indication that DM's interview statements were unreliable, particularly given the other corroborating evidence, and therefore no reason for law enforcement to include her qualifications in the affidavit. For this reason, it cannot be said that law enforcement intentionally or recklessly omitted the information. Further, the Exhibit A's inferred that DM was traumatized when they noted that she stood in a frozen shock phase. What the fuck are you talking about? She could have been in a frozen shock phase and she's just texting and calling people. She was traumatized when they noted that she stood in a frozen shock phase. When she saw the intruder. What? She thought I was Ethan's friend. What? She thought it was. Somebody's talking about Xana wearing all black. This necessarily alerted the magistrate that DM's memories were colored by trauma and shock, which goes to the issue of her reliability that the defendant targets in this motion. Finally, even had the Exhibit A's included DM's qualification to her memory, fuck just the qualifications to her memory, what about all the shit she was saying? It would have significantly undermined her credibility and would not have negated probable cause. It would not have significantly undermined her credibility and would not have negated probable cause. It would be no surprise to the magistrate that a person experienced experiencing what DM must have experienced, would be shaken by what happened. What in the world is going on here? Did this guy not have the text messages? I said, what happened? What did she shake? What happened? What happened? What did she see? Look at this. She would have been shaken by what happened. What did DM see? And would have questioned the reality of yeah, she would have totally been questioning it. This does not render her unreliable. No, what it renders is why nobody called 911 until noon. And that if this truly, what if this took place around 3 a.m., 3:15, 10 to 3, 2:30? Additionally, the bulk of probable cause came from other sources. Do you see this? The bulk of probable cause came from other sources. Exactly, Hippler. Make them use it. Because they ain't going to be able to use IGG. And because if the state wants it out and the defense wants it out, then how did you get to Brian Kober? Because Hippler seems to think that it's no big deal to be able to explain that. And that's why the title of this live is, who's the real fool here? Is it the defense? Is it the state? Or is it the judge? Again, additionally, the bulk of probable cause came from other sources, according to Hippler, including the extensive vehicle identification efforts. We've now got to see the picture. We see the picture that's outside the 1122 King Road house. We see the picture. We have it. We finally got that. He had it when he made this call. And he thinks that you can make a positive identification off of that fucking picture. Have you lost your mind? Including the extensive vehicle identification efforts. Good, you're going to need it. Thus, even if the magistrate questioned the reliability of DM, she had sufficient grounds, though. She had sufficient grounds through other evidence to issue the warrants. And this is where Anne said, wow, she knew she had the tic-tac-toe. It depends. Either we're going to get it here and it's going to be out, or we're going to get it on the back end. Trust me, we're eventually going to get it so that I'm telling you, it's not, because it doesn't make sense. You cannot have this trial without the IGG. Those are facts of this case that you cannot, that is how you identified Brian Kober. You cannot make up some generic way that you got to him. Sorry. Hippler says, in sum, defendant has not shown the DM's various qualifications for memory, blah, 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 blah. It is evident, and Hippler has it right here, ding, ding, ding. It's evident, as it should be to the whole entire world. You guys, it is evident from the applicable Exhibit A's that the DM, all that stuff with DM and why they had to put it in the probable cause, you guys, it's very simple. It's because DM's account was largely relied upon to establish the timeline of the fucking homicides. Hello? Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And he says, and a general description of the perpetrator. How he could even put the and on there is absolutely absurd. This is exactly why they put DM in here. Do you understand that the way this is going to be set up is Ann Taylor has no choice, none whatsoever, but to literally grill Bethany and Dylan because of the way this is all going to shake down. Her statements on these matters were consistent. While any perceived weakness in her memory may be fodder for cross-examination, they do not negate probable cause. Exactly. Keyword there, probable cause. However, the fact that DM could not identify the defendant is hardly exculpatory or material to probable cause. The defendant claims there are two material and exculpatory omissions in this paragraph. First, he asserts law enforcement should have disclosed the FBI's vehicle specialist has felt more comfortable with the 2011-2013 date range for the suspect vehicle. Second, he asserts that his specialist's opinion expanded the date range was predicated on the erroneous use of a video taken from Ridge Road, which law enforcement knew or should have known that it was not the suspect's vehicle. That is not suspect vehicle 1, okay? Which law enforcement knew or should have known. Defendant also faults the officers for failing to provide the magistrate with the footage reviewed by the specialist, which, according to defendant, would have demonstrated to the magistrate that a vehicle identification could not have been reasonably made, which means the picture that we all saw. The court finds the defendant's challenges are unsupported by his proffer and do not warrant a Franks hearing. This is why. According to Hippler, Agent Immel directed the FBI to open up their searches to 2011-2016. In doing so, he discussed the changes to the Elantra in 2014, like I told you guys, and 2017, which is past it, and stated that he wanted a better shot of the vehicle's front fog lights, because that's what changed, and the rear reflectors. Oh my God, Lana, you could do what you were doing. You did it. You nailed it. Woohoo! This is exactly what I said. You guys, we have the photo. We have the photo. You can't see any of that shit. You cannot see any of that stuff. Happy birthday, Lana. It's your birthday week. Woohoo! James, a member for 4 months, baby. Love you, James. Pop it, pop it. Next up. Next on stage. He further added that rather not leave anything out, better be safe than sorry. 5 minutes later, he sent another email stating, yeah, I see the change in 2014, and I'm not really a fan of the 2014, much prefer the 2011, 2013. But wanted to lay that out. Have a good night. That's what the email says. Now, how does Hippler say what he says up here? Because that's what the email says. Yep, I'm not a fan of the 2014 there. You guys know why? It's because of the side of the car. It's because of the side of the car. I know exactly why he's a fan of this and not the other one. We'll keep looking and send my new info I can come up with. These emails demonstrate that it was Agent Immel's decision to open up the date range. Well, who gives a fuck whose idea it was to open it up? Then he went ahead and came back and said what he said. What are you talking about? That's like when a judge says, well, guess what? So-and-so didn't reach out to that person. They were the ones that reached out to them. Who gives a shit? They still colluded. Who cares who did what? Can you prove collusion? Yes. Why would it matter of who contacted who first? What logic is that? I don't have to prove who contacted who first. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter that he said we can first open it up. It matters then what he said after he opened it up. Yep, no. This is awful. This is awful. Exhibit A accurately captures this decision by stating that the specialist initially believed it was a 2011-2013, but opened it up to 2011-2016 upon further review. Period. While Exhibit A did not call out that Agent Immel preferred narrow time frame, he's the fucking expert. You just said back about 2 paragraphs ago about Nick Balance was the expert and they were relying on him because but now here you want to twist? You cannot have it both ways. They are going to be shattered in court. They have no way to talk about how they ever got to Brian Kober. This is all falling. While Exhibit A did not call out that Agent Immel preferred narrow time frame, defendant has not shown this omission to be exculpatory. Are you shitting me? If the car is a 2014 or 2011 or a 12 or a 13, Brian Kober doesn't own one of those. He doesn't own that vehicle. If they showed the Ridge Road vehicle versus the one outside the house at 1122 that's on the 1112, are you kidding me? How is this not exculpatory? You're misleading the tribunal. That's exactly what it is. I was hoping that you could have seen Brian Kober in the damn vehicle. That's what I wanted. I wanted blood in the car. I wanted him trying to message them. I mean, something. Exhibit A is replete with evidence linking defendant's vehicle and cell phone to suspect vehicle 1. Oh my God. Yes, exactly. Go ahead and say this. Now, how are you going to be able to explain that to the jury? How are you going to be able to say that you found this guy in his phone and his car match and link, like Hippler is saying right here? Exhibit A, replete with evidence linking defendant's vehicle and cell phone to suspect vehicle 1. Considered as a whole, it cannot be reasonably concluded that Agent Immel's preference for a narrow date range would have derailed the magistrate's finding of probable cause had it been included. Gaines says, I think if the jury heard all of this shit, they will think the whole city is whacked out. They will think they are in Twilight Zone. They're not going to have a way to say, how about that? Hey, Hippler, how do we get to the point, though, that we get to show that we found out? How do we tell the jury that we found out that Brian Kohlberger even owns an Elantra and who Brian Kober even is. And about his phone and his phone number, and that it wasn't on the towers during the time period. Considered as a whole, probable cause is not an exact science. Yep. Because you guys don't think about it as probable cause now. I want you to think about now. This is about beyond a reasonable doubt, because that's where we're at now. This is trial time. Simply because Agent Immel may have felt more comfortable with earlier years within the range he provided does not mean he felt uncomfortable with the later years. Thus, it is highly unlikely that the magistrate would have disregarded the specialist's identification of the larger date range or otherwise declined. If you don't put the 2015 in it because there's such a big discrepancy between what the vehicle looked like from this year to this year because there's a big change. Like, whatever, dude. However, so the defendant infers that it was intentionally or recklessly omitted by pointing out that one of the earlier search warrant affidavits, Exhibit D10, and ISP's November 25th, 2022, Be on the Lookout bulletin indicated the suspect vehicle was right here. He points that it was only after Brian Kober, was identified through investigative genetic genealogy that the date range of the Hyundai Elantra was opened up to include the model year of defendant's Elantra. Boom. If you think that Ann Taylor is going to say that they want IGG out and that you don't think the sheath is coming with it, you're nuts because of this. Because of this. Did you just hear what I said there? In the small little footer, this is where Homie G wants to then say, let me just zoom in here. Look at me, wows. They didn't go back to ask this specialist about the year until after December 19th, when they had his name. And then they saw that his year was a 2015 white Honda Elantra. And so, hey, what do you think? Can it be from 2011, 2016? That's when he opened up the years. Nowhere is that even mentioned in here. And here, the judge is saying that, so without us even being able to talk about IGG and these dates, okay, the identification of Mr. Kohlberger, even if the state was to try to squeeze it in that we're going to use some generic way that we got to him, you can't, it won't be able to happen before December 19th. You can't just make up fucking a new narrative and go back in history and make some shit up. So this tip, it's never going to change that it was on the 19th. And it's never going to change the fact that you guys were looking at a car from the 2011, 2013. And then here's okay, on the 19th. Then, now you go to Immel and he opens it up, but then he comes back and he says, yeah, but no. No. And it's because it's the side of the car. The side of the car is why he's saying that. It's a bulkier model. But this is what Judge Hippler says. So this is what the defense is claiming and showing you. And Hippler says, however, the court is not willing to accept defendant's inference. You see that? However, you know what? I get exactly where you guys are going with this, but I am not willing to accept. What do you mean accept? That's exactly what happened. Why didn't they go back to, they knew about the damn car in November. Let's put the bowl out to the community here. Okay. They changed and go and ask that dude right after FBI tells MPD about Brian Koberger. But the judge, however, the court is not willing to accept that. Discrepancies between these documents and the later Exhibit A's challenged by defendant merely reflect that there was an initial belief that the suspect vehicle was a 2011-2013. That was subsequently revised. It is not indicative. It is not indicative of intentional or reckless omission. Okay. Further, the FBI emails clearly show that the specialists expanded the date range on November 26th. Exactly. That's why I want us. That's hello. Ding, ding, ding. Now you speak in my language. And if the state or if the defense is claiming, now think about it. If the defense is claiming, ready? Remember I told you they were going to flood this tip line? If the defense is claiming that they changed the date or that they expanded this after they identified Mr. Koberger, look at that date of that email. You see that? I thought that Payne didn't know about Brian Koberger until December 19th. Well, I could tell you there's a bunch of reasons why and how the defense knows and can prove. I don't give a fuck what Hippler says, that it doesn't make any sense how if the FBI was over there conducting their own investigation and they were able to get stuff and they're doing whatever they're doing, and then they realize, okay, hey, we're not going to do anything with it. It's you guys aren't willing to give us the case or whatever. Okay, here, now we're going to start breaking off some pieces. That's how Nick Balance was able to do what do you call it? He already had shit. This is going to be so fucking interesting. Well before defendant was identified through IGG in mid-December 2009. Exactly, Hippler. Exactly. And so all of you guys that are talking about another way that this is what leads me to believe right here that did the DNA come from the sheath? Did it come from something else? Could it have been on the sheath as well? But is there something else? Something's up. Defendant's lack of citations to the record was the reason the court required defendant to submit an amended Franks memorandum and exhibits. Defendant's continued failure to cure the problem on this issue indicates there is no evidence showing the vehicle identification was based on the Ridge Road footage. This is wild, man. Oh, shit. Here we go. I'm going to end on this note right here. So again, now think about what we know. This is me back when we first got this. There can be no question that defendant was identified in part through WSU officers' queries and through the suspect vehicle's lack of a front license plate, as observed in surveillance videos from the night of the murders. The fact that law enforcement had additional DNA evidence tying defendant to the crime does not render it improper for law enforcement to rely on independent evidence accomplishing the same. Right here, Bingo. Go ahead. You guys, they are going to town, I'm telling you, without IGG. And what's going to come of it is that they're going to realize that that is going to take out and wipe out the sheath. If IGG goes, I'm telling you, the sheath goes. Or if IGG goes and the sheath stays, the state does not have this whole called generic tip. There's no way you can rewrite history on how this whole case was investigated. You cannot lie to the jury on how you found Brian Kober. Brian Kober is not, nobody would be in this situation. You're not allowed, I am not going to be expected to defend myself against something that did not happen. I have to be able to cross-examine and destroy and scorch this investigation. And you think that by saying, hey, yep, IGG's out, you guys are just going to go ahead and say that law enforcement, like, there's one thing to suppress. You cannot add something to this case that didn't happen. You cannot do it. And nor is Ann Taylor going to agree to that shit. You have no way to explain to the jury how you got to Brian Kober because, unfortunately, Mr. Hippler, you don't know shit. Okay, I get it. You're the judge. You're supposed to be the referee. Okay. But if you think that this means a damn thing in this case, with unknown male blood, 2 unknown in the crime scene, fingernail scrapings, 3 unknowns, a 911 call that happens 9 hours later, these text messages that are just absurd. And you think that there can be no question that defendant was identified in part through the WSU officers' queries. I cannot wait for them to talk about that. And through this suspect vehicle's lack of a front license plate. As observed in surveillance videos from the night of the murders. The fact that law enforcement had additional DNA evidence tying defendant to the crime and chose not to use it, basically, does not render it improper for law enforcement to rely on independent evidence. Exactly. You got your probable cause that way. Go ahead. You got probable cause. Probable cause ain't going to get you a conviction. It's going to get you an acquittal. This is wild. Anti-Deb. Hippler ruled against Anne in part because she was timid in presenting her materials. She has to work with Moscow every day. It's a small area. Hold Moscow's feet to the fire, Britta. Yes, Britta, you can. I think when the world's watching, though, you get the biggest pass. You know what I mean? So, peace out, Girl Scouts. Bye. Mom.